Today I'm going to be showing you how to recreate this visual effects shot, and we're going to be doing it with entirely free software. Hey guys, hope you're doing great. Just recently I worked on a demo reel, updated 2019 demo reel of all my favorite shots, and for that demo reel I wanted to include a visual effects shot. Over the last couple months I've been really experimenting with doing 3D compositing, and the particular shots I've been doing have been shots similar to this, where I take a 3D model of a car and motion track the shot and then put that into it and realistically composite all the lighting to make it look good. And in researching how to do this, I haven't found a very succinct tutorial in how to do this. I've just been sort of picking and choosing a bunch of different tutorials, and now that I've done it a bunch of times, I think it is probably high time that I make a tutorial for it, since apparently this is something that is lacking on the internet, at least with this particular software that I'm going to be using. And that piece of software is called Blender. Now if you haven't heard of Blender, you are in for a treat, because Blender is probably one of the most useful softwares for digital artists ever created, period. And I'm not saying most used, that would probably be the Photoshop, but most useful, yes. And the main reason is because Blender can do so many things. It can do 3D animation, 3D modeling, 3D rendering, you can do video editing, and of course 3D compositing, which I'll be focusing on in this video series. And the best part is Blender is 100% free. Now this tutorial isn't exactly a beginner Blender tutorial, so if you haven't even ever heard of Blender, I would highly recommend going through some basic tutorials before you watch this video. I would highly recommend Blender Guru. It's a great YouTube channel you can start at. He just recently created an updated tutorial for the latest version of Blender, going through everything you need to know to get started, so I would highly recommend doing that. Okay, so how do we even go about making a shot like this? Well, there's a couple of different stages. The first stage is shooting, which is where you just go out and take the video, of course. The next stage is motion tracking, which will take that video and analyze the camera movements, so to tell the computer how we moved the camera so that we can composite 3D elements into it. And next, of course, is that 3D compositing, where we actually put in our 3D elements. And lastly is compositing, or I guess 2D compositing, where you just make everything blend together really well. In this video, all we're going to be going over is how to properly shoot footage for a visual effects shot like this, and then how to import that footage into the 3D software. Hopefully by the end of the series, you'll know how to do each one of these steps and be able to do it again, because everything you'll learn here doesn't just apply to this particular shot. You could use this on basically any 3D compositing, so it doesn't have to be a car, it could be, you know, anything you could imagine, really. But I think a car is a really good example because we have a lot of different surfaces to work with, so it's just a really good beginner's project. And it's really cool to make a realistic 3D composite of a car to send your friends and make them think you just got a new ride. But that's of course not what you should use this for at all. You should use it for creative, visionary filmmaking. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about shooting. Shooting is a super important part of the process, one often overlooked. The quality of your original footage will really determine the believability of the final shot. So this is the footage that I took for this tutorial. It's just a very basic move to the right and sort of push in of my driveway. Now to make it easier later on down the line, I would highly recommend using some sort of stabilization on your camera. I'm using a Steadicam. You could also use a gimbal, or just do the ninja walk to try to keep your movements as smooth as possible. What we're trying to do is reduce a lot of motion blur, which will make it way easier when we go to motion track the shot. I also wouldn't recommend doing a super long and complicated camera move. You can definitely do that with this software and this method. It's just a little beyond the scope of this video, and I think for a beginner, it's much easier just to keep a very simple, you know, push in or left to right camera move just for the tutorial. And then later on, you can of course go in and do much more complicated moves and learn how to do that as well. Another thing we're going to have to capture to pull off this visual effects shot is an environment, or basically just a 360 photo. All this is a panoramic image of our location, and we can use this when we go to composite to do things like reflections and lighting and make that very realistic to what it would actually look like if there was a car in the scene. To capture a 360 photo, you can do it on just your phone by downloading Google Street View, opening it up, logging in with your Google account, and then go ahead and hit the camera button on the bottom right. And then from there you can tap camera again, and then it will open up a camera view in which you can capture all the photos needed to create the 360 photo. For best results, you want to stand in the exact same location the entire time, just rotating your body, and you want to keep your phone as still as possible to get sharp images. So just go along and line up the circle with the dot for all the photos, and when you're done, you can go ahead and click the done button, and then once it's done processing, you can share it and save it to your camera roll, and then you can of course move that to your computer. You can also use a 360 camera like the Insta360 to get a much better 360 image, but for what we're doing, this will be totally fine. Okay, now let's go ahead and hop onto the computer and start inputting our footage into Blender. If you haven't already, go ahead and go to blender.org, and on the front page, click the Download Blender 2.80 and go ahead and install it. So now that you've got your video and your 360 photo, we're gonna go ahead and want to create a new folder to store all of our project files. I'm just gonna call this tutorial project, but you can call it tracking or whatever you want, and go ahead and put everything inside this. Okay, so before we can go ahead and start motion tracking this shot, we need to convert it to an image sequence. This is very important because if you try to motion track a non-image sequence video inside of Blender, it's gonna run into some problems when you try to open the file back up and it won't sync properly. So we want to go ahead and convert this into an image sequence, which is just a folder full of every single frame of the video in the form of a photo. You can do this in lots of different video editing softwares, but we're gonna actually do it inside of Blender since it has the ability. When you open Blender, you're going ahead and go ahead and get this scene. Now I'm not gonna really explain what everything is here. I'm gonna leave that to once we start getting into motion tracking and stuff like that. That's a little beyond the scope of this video, but what we're gonna do first is go up and hit the plus on the top here and go ahead and go down to video editing and video editing. And it's gonna bring up this view. All these things up top are just different workspaces or window configurations, similar to what you would have on any other video editing software. Over on the media panel on the left here, you can go ahead and navigate to your tutorial track and drag it in onto the timeline, or you can just drag the actual file itself and drop it in on the timeline. Either way, we'll get this thing. Now this bottom clip is the audio, which we won't be using for this. Now if you want to have audio in a visual effects shot, you totally can. You'll just go into your video editor later and add the audio from the unedited clip. So to erase the audio, you're going to go ahead and select the audio track, hit X, and then click Erase Strips. Now as you can see here, our timeline goes a bit past our actual video, so we want to go ahead and trim that back to the length of the video. So to do that, we can just go ahead and navigate to the very last frame. We can use the arrow keys to navigate different frames just like on a video editor, and we want to go ahead and find the frame that the video ends. And then down here we can see our current frame, and we want to go ahead and copy that frame and paste it into the end frame. That will go ahead and trim our timeline down to exactly what we need. Okay, now we want to go ahead and hop over to this panel on the right and make sure you're on this tab that looks like a printer, which is the output tab. And you want to make sure your resolution is set to the same resolution that you took the footage at. In my case, at 1080p, so this is all correct. Frame rate in our case doesn't really matter with an image sequence, so we'll leave that alone, although that is actually correct. And then scroll down under output and click the little folder next to this, and we want to set an output to where our image sequence will be exported. Go ahead and navigate to where you put your original project folder, and we're going to hit this button up here in the top left to create a new folder, and we're just going to call it tracking footage sequence. Double click that and hit accept. Alright, now that this is set up, all we have to do is render out every single frame and it will save it to a photo. So to do that, we're going to go up to render and then click render animation, or command F12. Then you'll see this start to happen, and Blender will just go through and see every single frame and export that as a photo to that folder. Alright, so once this finishes, you can go ahead and close out the window and close out Blender, hit discard changes because we won't need this particular project. And if we go to our folder where we put everything, we can see we have a new folder called tracking footage. I'm going to add spaces so that's actually formatted properly. And if you open this up, you'll see we have all the frames of our video. For some reason, the last couple frames are blank, so I'm going to go ahead and select those and just drag those to the trash. Alright, so that will about do it for part 1 of this video series. In part 2, we're going to go ahead and import that image sequence into Blender and motion track it and prepare it for 3D compositing. I'm Josiah, thanks for watching.